Hey, I'm excited to be able to talk to my church family this morning about generosity and having faith in our giving. I had taught a class 18 months ago here and used the text that we're going to use, talking about widows. And I thought if some of y'all were in there, it was a pretty big class, you may have some deja vu. I'm using some of those notes, but I thought, who in the world can even remember what they learned in Sunday school 18 months ago? I can't. So let me begin. Two guys are shipwrecked and end up on a deserted island. One guy's super nervous. We're doomed. We have no food or water. A calm guy's he's already resting in a hammock that he's fashioned, and he says, "Listen, I make $100,000 a week. You have nothing to worry about." The guy says, "We're doomed. Who cares if you make $100,000 a week? We're on a deserted island." He goes, the calm guy says, "I make $100,000 a week and I tithe. My preacher will find us." You know, churches and preachers get a bad rap, I think, sometimes, talking too much about money and giving. It's not something that they want to do, right, Houston? That's why I'm up here. But I don't think that's the case here at East Cobb. I think this is a very, very generous church. Many of you have been giving for a long time, and you give regularly. And when we're asked to give for something special, whether it's Agape or Ciudad or Mission Sunday, which is coming up in 6 or 8 weeks, you always come through. So I want to thank you for that, and also challenge some of us who might not be giving regularly yet. But if it's something you've been thinking about, I want you to know that as a Christian, it's what we do. It's who we are. And you may be thinking, well, you know what? I don't really have that much, so I'm not going to be able to give very much, so what's the use? Well, that's really what we're going to talk about this morning. Our text is from Mark chapter 12, and we're going to keep coming back to this. Read this with me. Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 small coins. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions. For they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on." That's just to me, that's a brief story, but very, very powerful. And I bet 99% of y'all have heard that 100 times. Read that story. What I want to do before we kind of get into talking about this widow, I want to give you a quick history lesson about the temple. I don't know about you, but when I read the Bible, I like to kind of picture what's going on. First, let me tell you, not about this temple. The first temple was built 1,000 years before Jesus by King Solomon. You can read about it in 1 Kings. 987 BC, I believe, is when that temple was built. It was a magnificent building, but very small. It was about 30 feet wide and 90 feet long. So 30 feet is about from this soffit to that soffit, and 90 feet is about from where I'm standing to those glass doors that we walked in out by the parking lot. 90 feet by 30 feet, 2,700 square feet. And that magnificent temple, scholars say when they built it, in the money from that time would have cost about $30 million. But listen to this, what scholars have tried to figure out what that temple would cost to build today. It had tons of gold in it, which gold's $18.50 an ounce now. Some estimates are as high as $100 billion with a B to build that temple as small as that from today in today's times. What happened, though, is after that temple was built in 1000 BC, 400 years later, King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians come and take the Jews captive, take the kingdom of Judah captive. They tear down the temple. 50 years goes by. The Babylonians are taken over by the Persians. Are you following me on this history lesson? King Cyrus allows some of the Jews, led by a guy named Zerubbabel, to go back and rebuild the temple. So in around 540, 538 BC, Zerubbabel takes a group back, and they build basically this temple here. It's actually called Herod's temple. So, but then the reason is, 500 years before Christ, they build this temple. King Herod was one of the Judean kings he was just a bum. Let me just say that. He was the guy that the wise men came and talked to about, hey, we want to go find this king that's been born. And he says, oh, I'd like to worship him too. And he ends up killing all the little boys under 2 years old in Bethlehem. That was King Herod. King Herod, a few years before Christ, had taken this temple that was built 500 years earlier and did a lot of renovations to it and added on to it and made it really nice. And I want you to kind of know what we're talking about when there's so many stories in the New Testament of Jesus, of Paul, of Peter. They're always walking around the temple. They're teaching at the temple. This is kind of how it's laid out. The court of Gentiles, you can see that up here on the left. Anyone could go there, foreigners, Gentiles. You didn't have to be Jewish to go in that area. In fact, the story that Ed just read about the money changers, that is where that would have happened. Where, if you're wondering about that story, when you would come and give money at the temple, you gave coins. And you weren't allowed to give coins that had political figures on them or mythological figures. You had to use proper coinage. So these money changers would set up tables and they would exchange your money for proper money and rip you off and charge you really high fees. Or they would, if you got to the temple and you had forgotten your sacrifice, you didn't have birds or a lamb, they would sell you one at a really high rip-off price. And so Jesus was very upset about this. That happened in the court of the Gentiles. Remember the lady brought in adultery where Jesus got down and wrote with his finger and then said, okay, let the first one who hasn't sinned throw the first stone. That would have happened in the court of Gentiles. Then you had the women's court right here. That's where our story today happens. The women's court wasn't just for women. It was for any Jewish men and women. Then you had the court of Israel, which is where Jewish men could go, and then the court of priests, where only priests could go. In this temple court of women, it's also called the temple treasury area. It's hard to see, but if you look in between those columns, those little dark figurines there, those are collection boxes. In the temple during Jesus' day, they had 13 collection boxes, and they were for different things. A couple of them for paying the temple tax. Remember in Matthew 17, some guys talk to Peter and go, hey, does your master pay the temple tax? Peter goes, oh, yeah, of course. I'm paraphrasing. He goes to Jesus, goes, these guys are asking me about the temple tax. Jesus goes, yeah, we should probably pay that. Go throw out a line. First fish you catch, you'll find the money in it to pay the temple tax. What a miracle that was. Peter does it, opens the fish's mouth. There's a silver Roman coin called a drachma. Hey, what a coincidence. It's just enough to pay the temple tax for Peter and Jesus. Two of those boxes were for paying the temple tax. Others were for paying for stuff like wood, sacrifices, for gold vessels. This is where you came and gave money. The boxes looked like this. They had kind of a trumpet-shaped funnel almost that was made out of metal that you would throw the coins in. So this widow gives 2 lepta. That is a Greek word for the smallest coin in circulation in Palestine in the first century. The reason we say widow's mite is in the King James Version, that's what it's called, the widow's mite. Each of those coins was worth 1/100th of a denarius. All right, what's a denarius? That is a coin that they say was worth about 1 day's labor. So if you figure each of those coins that little widow lady put in the box was 5 or 10 minutes worth of labor. So we're not talking about 2 pennies here, but we're probably talking about less than $2 in change. And even though that's all she gave, Jesus praises her. A side note, I was doing a lesson on this at Grace Chapel a few years ago, and we were talking about giving, and a lady came up to me, a widow lady named Lynn. I know you can't hardly see this. It's just a little dark spot on a piece of paper, but that is a widow's mite, a replica of a widow's mite. She came up and gave it to me after my lesson the next week, and I thought it was a great lesson. She said, I've carried one of these little widow mite replicas in my coin purse for 50 years, and it just, every time I see it, it reminds me that I need to give my all to Jesus. That was a better lesson than the one I did in my Sunday school class. Just Lynn saying that to me. Jesus positions himself so that he can see people giving. And he sees, you see all these rich people putting huge amounts of coins in there. Jesus he used everything as a teaching moment. He usually, a lot of times we hear him saying when people did stuff wrong, he was usually pointing fingers at the Pharisees and the religious leaders. But he also pointed out when people were doing things right, which I think is a great lesson for us as grandparents and parents. Whether it was the Roman soldier who Jesus said, hey, he has the most faith in all of Israel, or in some story, in some versions, it's Mary, in others, it's an unnamed woman who puts perfume on Jesus' feet, and he says, look what this lady's doing for me. Pointing out when somebody's doing something good. So that's a good lesson for us. Matthew 6, verse 2. When you give to someone in need, don't do as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. I tell you the truth, they've received all the reward they will ever get. It's interesting he uses the word trumpets. Some scholars think it's a veiled reference to those boxes I showed you that had the trumpet shape on top. Because when you put coins in it, it made a lot of noise. And don't you know some of those rich religious leaders really made a show of it when they put those coins in there. It made a lot of noise. Jesus had actually rebuked those same folks, the showy leaders in the verses just before the story about the widow's mite. Mark 12. Jesus also taught, beware of these teachers of religious law, for they like to parade around in flowing robes and receive respectful greetings as they walk in the marketplaces, and how they love the seats of honor in the synagogues and the head tables at banquets. Yet they shamelessly cheat widows out of their property and then pretend to be pious by making long prayers in public. Because of this, they will be more severely punished. This widow's giving God all she's got. And these guys are supposed to be men of God are cheating people like her. They give long pious prayers, but then they treat people badly. That's like me doing this lesson on giving and kindness, and then going down to Johnson Ferry and eating lunch and being super rude to the server. That's not walking the walk. That's what Jesus was talking about, these religious leaders. Jesus again mentions widows in these verses we just read, and he and God were very, very concerned about widows. Houston did some great teaching on this and shared some verses with us about 3 weeks ago. I'm going to use a couple of those verses. If you'll bear with me, I just want to talk to you a minute about widows. We're told to look out for them and take care of them. In Luke 7, there's a story where it goes down to a village in Nain. Nain was 90 miles from Jerusalem. You ever thought how much Jesus walked? Scholars say he walked 20 miles a day. I don't know how many steps that is, with 40,000 or something. We talk about walking 15,000 steps. Think how good a shape Jesus and his disciples were in. Walk 20 miles a day. He goes to that 90, hey, let's go down to Nain. Takes you about 6 days to get there. He goes down to Nain. There's a funeral procession coming out of the village, and Jesus knows it's a widow lady who has lost her only son. And Luke says his heart overflowed with compassion for her. So he walks up to the coffin and touches it and says to the boy, get up. And he sat up, started talking. Jesus gives him back to his mother. We read that and we just pass it. It just goes right in one ear and out the other almost. Can you imagine that scene? All those people, the poor widow lady and her young boy, and Jesus gives him back to her. James 1:27, the gold standard of widow verses. Pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. You know, a portion of every dollar that we give goes to help orphans. Jenny Tidwell, the Whites, Daniel, See You Died. Man, we got orphans covered. We want to cover widows too, and we do. A lot of the ladies in here, I know, help each other, but we're going to get even more organized with that. Here's another verse that Houston read. I just want to read the first part of the one that he did. Take care of any widow who has no one else to care for her. But if she has children or grandchildren, their first responsibility is to show godliness at home and repay their parents by taking care of them. This is something that pleases God. Now, a true widow, a woman who is truly alone in this world, has placed her hope in God. She prays night and day, asking God for his help. Many of you who know me, I'm almost a broken record over the years talking about widows and taking care of people that have a hard time. When I was 10 years old, my brother was 7, my mom became a widow at 36. Kelly, my wife, her mom became a widow at 29 with 4 children. Kelly was the oldest in 3rd grade, down to a 9-month-old. So it's our life experience. And, you know, when my dad died, we had more than 2 lepta. I'll say that. We didn't have a whole lot more, did we, Mom? We weren't rich by any means. And here's what I saw. A church family, we had great friends in a great church family, which is what happens when you get involved in a church. And some friends paid off our tuition to go to a Christian school. Another family that had 5 kids of their own invited us to go on their vacation with them that first summer. And they rented a big house in Florida and took us. How many times do we say, I don't know how in the world people make it without a church? I mean, I say that all the time. I don't know how people do it. And I think with Houston's been talking a lot about a care ministry that we're trying to get going. You already do that. We're just trying to get it a little bit more organized and get people in the right leadership positions to do that. And we're going to do an even better job, a more organized job of taking care of people. If you are a widow or you are a single mom, I know sometimes it's lonely, but I don't want you to feel alone. I want you to feel like you've got us, you've got a church family, and just get involved with this church and let us know. If you know someone or you yourself need help, you just let us know. Talk to me, talk to any of the elders, talk to Houston, Laney, Linda, Brett. We want to help you. All right, that's my talk about widows. Let me get back to the kind of the widow mite story and giving sacrificially. We hear a lot of stories about rich guys giving huge sums of money, which is great. Organizations need rich guys giving huge sums of money. But you know what we don't hear a lot about, other than the widow's mite story, of a poor person giving a small gift. We hear when Warren Buffett gave $37 billion to the Bill Gates Foundation. We heard a couple of years ago, y'all may have seen it on the news, Robert Smith, who is an investment billionaire, spoke at Morehouse to 400 graduates. Y'all remember what he did? He said, the class of 2019, you're my class. I'm paying off all your school debt. 400 kids, they said that cost him $40 million. They had an average $100,000 debt per kid. We hear about that kind of stuff on the news. We don't hear about small gifts. You know, I mentioned my mom was a widow with us for 3 years, and then God sends Jesse Long into our life. Some of y'all know Jesse. Many of you do. Many of you know of him. In the 60s, he was the president already of Greater Atlanta Christian School, even before the doors were open. He was trying to raise money, traveling all over the place. Ed Zaylor told me the first check he wrote when he was a teenager was to GAC. Jesse came and spoke at their church. I think that's fantastic. Jesse told a story in 1967, he went to Union City, Georgia. He called them Brother and Sister Morgan. And they had called and said, hey, Jesse, we'd like to meet you. Would you come out to our house? So he drove down to Union City. And let's see, he noticed when he got there, they were washing their clothes on a washboard. How many of y'all have ever washed clothes on a washboard? Quite a few. Ansel, I had to look up on YouTube how to do, I was just curious, like, how do you wash clothes on a board? I had to look up, and there's a little 6-year-old country girl teaches you how to wash clothes on a washboard. And you have to really scrub it. You know, it was not easy. And Jesse, when he got to these people's house, this older couple are washing their clothes on a washboard, and Jesse goes, why don't y'all get a washing machine? And in 1950, I mean, most Americans had a washing machine. This was 1967. And they said, well, we decided we would forego getting a washing machine because we want to give the money we were going to spend on that to you to start that school. Hey, Jesse said the biggest gift they got that first campaign was $15,000. He said there was no gift greater than that. It was about $200 from Brother and Sister Morgan because they sacrificed getting a washing machine and washed their clothes like this. A few weeks ago, we lost a giant. I see Ken here. Ken Schumard. John talked about it last week. Bill Long, Houston, Kurt Schumard, Ken's nephew, did a great job talking about Ken at that funeral. That was one of the most uplifting funerals I've ever been to. I'm going to tell you a quick story about Ken that wasn't told at that. And this didn't even happen right around, the last few weeks. Kurt Schumard, Ken's cousin, nephew that spoke, and I were eating lunch. We were talking about giving. We were both going to campus at the time. Ken Sr., Ken Schumard, the Schumard family's given away a ton of money. And Ken and Joyce are so generous. And they had given money to GAC and have something there called Schumard Center, a center of learning. And Ken was there. I think we were having a reception and, kind of opening the place. And a young guy, Kurt told me this story because Kurt was standing there. A 25-year-old guy just out of college came up and said, hey, Mr. Schumard, I sure do appreciate, I heard you gave all the money for this, and that's so great. When I want to be successful like you, I'm going to make it big someday, and I'm going to give away a lot of money like you do. And if you know Ken, just like Jesus, he's going to use that as a teaching moment in a nice and humble way. And Kurt said, Ken put his arm on that kid and said, how are you doing in your giving right now? He said, it's great to aspire to give away a lot of money, but how are you doing right now with what you have? Because when you get a lot of money, you don't just all of a sudden become super generous. You start out smaller and build up to that. I thought that's great advice right there, because I've been there. I've been there where when Kelly and I got married, I was bringing home $243 a week in the building business. I don't even know. I mean, I know times were different 40 years ago, but some of you can tell me, well, I made 5 cents a week. And you wonder, how did you give to the church? But you did. I guarantee you, some of you folks made hardly anything, but you gave to church. There's when the widow lady gave that money, do you think when she walked up to that beautiful temple that I showed you, that she was thinking in her mind, my two lepta, my 2 mites don't amount to a hill of beans. What's the use of even giving this to this huge building? If she did think that, she still gave it. And Jesus didn't. He was there with the disciples looking at her. He didn't jump out and go, hey, wait a minute. You don't need to drop. You don't need to give that $2 worth of coins. God doesn't need it. He let her give it, and he said, I'm proud of her. Her gift was more meaningful than all the ones these rich guys are giving. As we started out, I said that we need to give no matter how much money we have. Even if we don't have much, we're called to be generous. In Luke 12, Jesus tells us, from everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. 1 Corinthians 16:2, Paul says, on the first day of the week, you should each put aside a portion of the money you have earned to give. I want to close out with a 2.5-minute video clip here in just a second. Let me set it up for you. If you were in my class 18 months ago, you don't remember any of this stuff that I'm saying, but you will remember this clip because I showed it. It's that powerful to me, 2.5 minutes. I watched a show called The Kindness Diaries. It was on Netflix for a couple of seasons. I don't even know where you can watch it now. I've seen some YouTube videos of it. A guy named Leon Logothetis, he was a British stockbroker investment guy, made a ton of money. And he decided he's going to retire early. He's like 40 years old. And I'm going to travel the world and see if people are kind. And it's kind of like undercover boss. He didn't tell anybody he had a lot of money. He just traveled around. He came to the U.S. in the first season, rode on a motorcycle, and would literally just walk up to people on the street. Can I have some money for food? Can I stay at your house tonight? Can I get money for gas? I'm just traveling the country. And some of the people were very, very kind to him. They showed a lot of rejection. Like people thought, what's this crazy guy asking me if he can stay at my house tonight? This is a scene where I believe he's in Philadelphia. And just watch what happens on this. Brett, would you do that?
People tell me all the time they want to help, but they just have problems of their own.
She's been homeless for about 1.5 years.
I think of all the problems in the world, being homeless has got to be one of the hardest.
When I got to be 8 or 9, I suppose, right around that age, my dad got killed. My mother, she's crying like, how am I going to feed you guys? How am I going to get you school clothes? So I started getting in trouble. I started going out and get student food from the store, from the supermarket. I take lunch meat, hot dogs, simple stuff kids can eat. Wound up in juvenile hall. Juvenile hall led me to prison.
He had nothing in the world by any real standards. When I met Tony, I had no idea how hard his life was.
Can I live in your house tonight?
Unfortunately, I don't have a house. I'm homeless right now. If I did, you'd be more than welcome there.
And yet, what did he do? He offered to help.
All we have to offer you here as far as hospitality is our camp. You're welcome to come over there and sit around and rest or eat something if you're hungry or whatever. You never know when a stranger's going to wander in from the bus station or something, or you get stuck here and stranded and need a place to lay down. And I always keep a bare bedroll and blanket and pillow and stuff wrapped up and tucked away in plastic so it's dry and clean, because people need that.
He took me in. He gave me a place to stay, food to eat.
It seems to me that sharing is extremely important to you.
It is, because it feels good to share. And you can make someone's day, you can make them feel better, you don't know what a person's going through. It's better to give than receive. Because you can receive so much, your pockets are full. What are you going to do with it? When you share it with somebody, you feel good, right? It's more valuable. It's more valuable money.
He literally offered me everything he had.
They're brand new. I have a few pair of underwear. You see they have clothing and stuff. I'm positive. I have extras.
This guy has nothing. And he's letting me stay with him in his home. Giving me his clothes so he hasn't worn, because he's worried that I won't have enough clothes for my journey.
If Tony, a man with absolutely nothing, can still be kind,
But I'll lay this down for you because it'll keep the pain from being as hard.
then why can't everyone?
I love that. That's just a great example of a modern day widow's mite to me. Just the attitude of that kindness and giving. What we need. Would y'all bow with me? Father, just thank you for our time together and help us to have the heart of the widow in Mark 12 and of this guy, Tony. Look at our own situation, what we have, and be generous givers and generous with our kindness. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Hey, in a second, we're going to stand up. I know people don't walk down the aisle much anymore. But if you need prayers, or you want to be baptized, or you want to just talk about it, you're welcome to come down the aisle or talk to me after church or call Houston, or we'll do it tonight, or we'll do it Tuesday night. But if for any reason you need help, you let us know. But if you want to come forward while we stand and sing, you can. Let's stand and sing.